Hello and welcome to the program where I put the world in context. This week was rich in important news in Russia, so we take a closer look at the following stories. Russia welcomes a new president and the world is beginning to notice. Prime Minister Vladimir Putin back to the past to go to the future. The rise of Soviet nostalgia, history without politics. Russia has a new president. The inauguration of Dmitry Medvedev was long anticipated by the Russian public. But the rest of the world scarcely knows the man who has followed in Vladimir Putin's footsteps. However, that has not stopped some from speculating where Russia's foreign policy will go under Medvedev. Putin's primary foreign policy agenda was the following: return Russia to its rightful place on the world stage and protect and advance Russia's foreign policy interests. This was not always welcomed, particularly in Western capitals. I contend Medvedev will stay this course. Nonetheless, it should be expected that his style will be different. So, what are some in the world expecting from the new man in the Kremlin?
Starting off with everybody outside Russia saying, hey, this guy is a breath of fresh air, he was never involved in the security services, he's actually worked in business, he's a lawyer, he talks about the rule of law. And then gradually things may be going back to a slightly difficult period, because there are an awful lot of problems to sort out, and the most difficult problem of all, I suspect, is this great issue of Russia's near abroad, the former Soviet republics around Russia, and how Moscow deals with them, and if Moscow finds it very difficult to deal with them as serious independent countries, that creates problems then, I think, with the rest of Europe.
Well, I hope the world will give Medvedev at least the benefit of the doubt. But I have serious misgivings whether Russia will change its current neighborhood policy. This is Russia's backyard. It has every reason to be concerned with what is happening on its borders and to its co-nationals and citizens in neighboring countries. This is what happened under Putin, and I suspect this policy will remain the same under Medvedev. Then there's the issue of Russia's relations with the rest of the world, especially the West.
Well, the rest of the world will be looking much more for relations between Russia and the outside world. And here they will be hoping for some clear changes. There will be some continuity, obviously, because Russian policy and foreign policy in general doesn't change overnight. But what the rest of the world would like is a slightly gentler, more cooperative face in the Kremlin. In the last 2 or 3 years, we've seen a rather rough nationalistic aspect to the leadership coming from Moscow. Russia's relations with the West have deteriorated. That's not always Russia's fault, but the fact is that relations have become very prickly.
The West's efforts to contain Russia's influence in the world have faltered. The new Russian president is very willing to listen, and I strongly believe that the world, particularly the West, should reconsider the geopolitical reality of the new Russia and approach Medvedev hoping for a new start. Face it, Russia is committed to defending its national interest, no matter who's in the Kremlin. Prime Minister Vladimir Putin. Well, it still doesn't yet roll off the tongue like President Putin, but still, the former president now heads Russia's government. I see it as Putin heading a government with many more powers and much more responsibility. Both are desirable and necessary. I'll explain why. The role of Prime Minister in Russia does not have a distinguished history. Former President Boris Yeltsin frequently hired and fired Prime Ministers when it served his political purposes, and almost none of them were notably effective or memorable. Later, when Putin assumed the presidency, he preferred prime ministers who fit the role of a technocrat. Their task was to manage the nation's economy. This was always one of Putin's top priorities. And the Russian constitution permits the president to delegate significant powers if he or she wishes. And there is ample evidence that President Dmitry Medvedev is in the process of empowering his prime minister, Vladimir Putin. And this is as it should be. Russia's political culture has matured to allow more than one center of power. No one denies that former President Vladimir Putin changed Russia. A very strong presidency was what was needed. Back then, in the 1990s, there was political deadlock and economic collapse. Executive authority took the lead. The other branches of government and weak political parties followed. But because of Putin's successes, Russia has entered a new stage of governance. Now, the more checks and balances in government, the better. For many, the Medvedev-Putin tandem is fraught with dangers and even political opportunism. The same observers say only one can lead in Russia. What is called a dual presidency or dual power cannot work. This is where punditry is wrong. The debate surrounding the evolution of Russia's political transformation focuses too much attention on personalities. The real changes occurring are systemic. It is not only about Medvedev and Putin, but how the president and the prime minister, parliament, and political parties will find places in Russia's evolving political life. This is why this transition is so important.
For the first time in centuries, the new ruler has not created new rules. Well, he has, but he's never changed the law. You know, he's a lawyer, he's a constitutionalist. Even if you look at things like disappearance of direct elections of governors, believe it or not, but that was according to the Constitution. He reinterpreted it, he did, but then he never changed the Constitution, and the very fact that he is leaving means that he is a constitutionalist.
However, not all in Russia are convinced. They don't see this transition of power as progress. In fact, they see a form of stagnation, especially in light of changes within the government as Vladimir Putin moves to the prime minister's office. For example, the number of deputy prime ministers is set to expand. This is deemed by many as not streamlining the government, but actually expanding an already bloated bureaucracy.
Сейчас говорят о правительстве, об 11 премьерах. Это вызывает горькое сожаление.
As far as the government reshuffle is concerned, well, I think it is very unfortunate for Russia.